Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the council briefing of the 1st of March 2022. For anyone who is live streaming this meeting, you'll see that we are conducting this meeting in what we're calling hybrid mode, where we have some people in attendance in the chamber. So that's myself, CEO David McLennan and Councillor Suzanne Warner, along with Wendy supporting us and our governance manager Peter Burris, and then we have other councillors attending via Zoom. We do have a councillor, Iapolo, has just let us know that he is running about 20 minutes late, but apart from that, all council members are in attendance. So I welcome you and declare the meeting open at 6:01 p.m. and acknowledge that we meet tonight on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay our respects to elders past and present. We do have a member in our public gallery this evening, which is one of the benefits of hybrid meetings. So I'm not sure if you're here to speak on it. Oh, hello, Mario. Didn't recognise you under the mask. Are you wishing to speak, or are you here to observe?
I'm happy to speak if I think.
Well, this is your opportunity. So if you would like to speak, we will call open public question time, and please come up to the microphone.
Thanks,
Yep. Now is your time to shine.
Okay.
Mario, just because I need to just let you know, so we do ask that you state your full name, the suburb in which you reside, and the item that you're speaking to.
Okay.
And we give you 3 minutes.
Okay,
Thanks.
Yeah, Mario Alberti. I live in Leederville, just behind the land that I'm actually speaking about, in Brentham Street, and I'm the CEO of Rosewood Group, which has the aged care facility next to the land in question. Some time ago, when I was made aware of this land potentially coming onto the market or for whatever, we proposed to the council, to the city, a dementia theme park, which would basically bring about what is probably the only one in Australia of this nature, where the residents from the aged care facility could spill out onto a park which would have all the features of including their relatives. It would have places like gardens, themed gardens, and activity centres. And we also proposed that this land could in fact have another component with the front part, which is the Brentham Street, of having an NDIS development. Rosewood does not do NDIS, but we would be quite happy to construct and subcontract out the NDIS component. We've been approached on more than one occasions to actually undertake NDIS on behalf of people, mainly in the suburb, and one in particular in Anzac Road, which we can't put NDIS people into the aged care. So it's a great opportunity for the city to have a real best practice dementia theme park. So we would do those two things. We also made it clear, and we've had a good relationship with the school, that even though we would have security around the site, we would allow access to two components within the city. One would be the school children could come in at designated times, and other times we've spoken to the Leederville Gardens village people and other seniors, because we would have an activity centre there, we'd have a little bit of a theme park, but they could also access this in a controlled space. So we see this as a great opportunity, not only for the city, but for Rosewood, obviously, but it would be something low intensity. We don't have a great intention of construction on that site. I'm fully aware that that site has some hazardous, could potentially have hazardous acid soils. And we had the experience building next door where we went down, we're only about 1,100, 1,200 millimetres to water. So it's a very wet site, and we would like to have a passive on-the-ground activity. But I stress that once Rosewood owns the site, this concept does not change. But we personally, from my point of view, I can't see why I would change that, because it would give the opportunity for Rosewood to have just be a trailblazer in this particular area. So I'm open to questions, if there are any from councils.
We don't normally take questions at this point,
Oh,
Mario,
okay.
but what will happen is because you've raised this item first, we will come to this item first for council to ask questions on this item of administration.
Okay.
But do appreciate you outlining
Thank you.
what could be a plan for the site.
Good on you. Thank you very much.
Mario.
Thank you. See you later.
See you. Okay, so we do not have anyone else attending in the public gallery this evening. Wendy, did we have any questions put forward in advance? No other questions, so then I'll close public question time. So that then takes us to declarations of interest, and I'll go to the CEO for those.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I haven't received any declarations of interest from council members tonight.
Councillors, any last minute declarations of interest? Councillor Alexander, I'm just wondering if you might be able to leave your camera on during the meeting. I just think we do need to have cameras on for attendance, otherwise we'll probably have to mark you as leaving the chamber. Okay, having some technical issues. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Through Mayor Cole, just in relation to Councillor Alexander, he's trying to access both the Zoom and our council agenda on the screen at the same time. I'm not sure, Councillor Alexander, if it would be possible for you to access the Zoom on your telephone and click on the link on your telephone, and then you could use your iPad for the meeting agenda papers.
Shall we move on? Okay. Okay, so no declarations of interest this evening, so we'll move on to items of business for questions and answer. We have just had item 5.4 raised by Mario Zilberto, who has attended in person this evening, so we will go straight to that item, which is the sale of number 26 Bentham Street, Leederville. Councillors, can I take questions on this item, please? Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a query about the time frame that we would expect between sale of this land and the an actual acquisition from the subsequent sale, given that I think there's a few process steps we need to go through.
Through the chair, yes, there's several steps to go through. Currently, there is an investigation being undertaken in actually assessing where exactly public open space needs or shortfalls are, and that will be scoping out essentially where population density is expected to increase, and then what the public open space needs will be from those future projections. That report will then drive a consideration for council where public open space might be acquired, whether it is actually acquiring land specifically or pursuing other public open space options in creating public open space. The information that's driven through that investigation will also then inform a policy that will be developed in respect to public open space creation and also land creation or acquisition. So that particular policy is expected to be presented to council in the second half of this year. So one would expect that based on that, the proceeds certainly wouldn't be expected to be accessed the current financial year, and it's probably not the following financial year. But after that, you might expect that, given that we'll have an understanding where public open spaces are actually required, then we can start pursuing opportunities from that point.
Thank you. So under the public open space strategy, I thought we already had an identified areas of deficit of public open space through the mapping work that we did there.
I believe that generally has but that needs to be further developed as far as I understand.
I'd be interested to get some more detail on that if I could, because from what we've seen, that seemed pretty detailed on, you know, distances to different scales of parks and a colour coding scheme that basically identified a number of locations that have significant distance to public open space. So I'm just wondering if it's necessary to do further work given we already have that.
Councillor Layden, I can see that the Director of Strategy and Development has popped up, and I think also I had a question about, and this sort of goes to yours to add on before we go to the Director, is about whether we could actually include a map of the Mount Hawthorn area that's mentioned in the report and actually highlight the deficient area, because it does talk about the area being the former Glendalough part of Mount Hawthorn, and it talks about it being in the northwest, I think, but that's just going by memory. I'll go over to the Director now.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, that's correct. That northwestern part of the city is where the main deficiency is, and that is all mapped out in the POS strategy. So we can attach that to the report. That's a great suggestion, and you're right, Councillor Layden, that work has been done, but we would need to revisit where the priority was within that area, where the opportunities were within that area. It's just part of a broader project that would commence once we were in a position to start looking for those opportunities, financially, that is.
Thank you, Director. So, I mean, the POS strategy identified maybe 3 or 4 specific locations across the city, and then this would be basically saying, of these 4, we think we can do these things here, and we target land acquisition towards somewhere else, because those are the places where we don't think we've got alternative options for public open space.
Yes, exactly. So it's going to come down to where the priorities are too, I think. So where the greatest shortfall is out of those areas where there are poor access to public open space because it's not within walkable distance or whatever the circumstances might be. So I think we need to prioritise as well as identify what the opportunities are. So if there's road reserves that can be used, obviously we would do that first. And if they don't exist, then it would be about acquiring land or increasing the capacity of existing public open space to service a greater area, those kinds of things. So I think there's a few things that need to be considered there, but that'd be all worked through as part of that project.
And I guess then to look at these funds that are allocated, then would a roads to reserves opportunity come out of these funds as well then?
Yeah, that's right. It could absolutely be. These funds could be used for that option as well. Mm-hmm. And yeah, they could be. The public open space reserve can be used for anything from purchasing land through to repurposing road reserve or unused land that the city has control over, through to providing additional facilities in existing public open space.
Thank you. And I guess, does that mean that, so part of the discussion is to put in different delegations, I guess, at some point to facilitate those strategic land acquisitions, but that's a longer term process, but shorter term, there's roads to reserves type opportunities instead?
I think it'd all be considered as part of the one project. So we'd have to work out what the priorities were, and potentially purchasing land would be the priority. I'm not, we haven't come to that decision yet. But certainly the easiest thing to do would be to repurpose a road reserve like we've done in other circumstances where there's an opportunity to do that. But if those opportunities don't exist, then, we have done a bit of work over the years looking at that area in the northwest part of Mount Hawthorn, and we haven't found any opportunities out there that were obvious outside of land controlled by main roads like the Freeway Reserve. So it's potential that there's the potential that that it might be the priority to start looking to purchase land. So But that's something that will have to come out of discussions as part of putting that project together.
One of the pieces of feedback that came back from the initial consultation was around what are we going to do with the funds, and being able to demonstrate where the benefit is. And obviously holding those funds in reserve isn't delivering a benefit in. Are we going to be in a position to give an indication of what those benefits will be at the point of actual sale, so that when we've got this proposal to sell for X dollars, we could have a demonstration of what we would actually be doing with those funds? Or is that going to be too tight a time frame?
Well, if it's, I think we can certainly do some more work on the project planning, so that we could give the community a better indication of where we would be focusing our attention. So which area in the city of Vincent, where there's clearly a need for public open space, we would be focusing on. So that's something that we probably could do. We certainly wouldn't have an answer to exactly what's going to happen, because if it's going to involve, well, we probably won't have an answer to what's going to happen, because it might involve purchasing land, and we wouldn't be in a position to go and purchase land until we had the funds in the reserve. So yeah, I think there is an opportunity for us to progress this further, so that when we get to that the point of having the money in the reserve, we can at the point of selling the land, we would be in a good position to indicate where we're looking to acquire or develop public open space.
And what would be the rough timeline between us saying yes to selling the land next week and that transaction occurring?
So the scheme amendment needs to be processed first, and that will take 12 months or longer. So we're talking, we're talking over 12 months before the sale would occur.
But that'll be a resolution that comes back to council to consider?
In relation to the scheme amendment, do you mean?
Sorry, in relation to the sale. So there'll be potentially multiple offers that are put in for the sale, and council would have to agree to which option is selected, or is that a delegation under this decision?
I'll pass that to the Executive Manager of Corporate Strategy and Government.
Through the chair, it will be by public tender. And given I don't think the CEO has a delegation to be able to accept certain tenders, that would in all likelihood go to council.
It'd be good to get just some clarification of if it's in all likelihood, or if it definitely will come back to council. And it'd be good to, if it is a year that it'll take roughly, it'd be good to understand what could be done between now and then to give some demonstration where that would go, and recognizing that that might be, some of that might be confidential if we're specifically targeting certain parcels of land for acquisition, but if it were other opportunities like roads to reserves, that'd be a good thing to be able to share in a public domain to give context to the direct community benefit.
And your question is, will that be possible within 12 months?
Yeah, sorry, there was an intonation at the end there which implied.
Yeah, I read that. I'm just clarifying. Can I just add to that, because I think that line of questioning has highlighted that there has already been some preliminary work that had been done previously in this area. So I guess the question to administration is, would we be in a position within this period of time that the scheme amendment goes through the process to at least identify, say, north-facing lots within the zone that would be opportunistic to purchase if they became available, roads to reserves projects that could be made possible in that area, because I recall previously looking at the Bonnevale and adjoining cul-de-sac area. And are there other potential long-term leasing opportunities, because we also had looked at private land holdings where there was actually significant unused space that we could potentially explore. So I think the question is, whilst it might not be possible to say this is what we're going to spend the money on, could we have developed more further, sort of build on that preliminary work that's been done in the past to build some options for council to explore in more detail, and for us to be able to demonstrate to the community that this is genuinely moving forward in developing public open space in this area of Mount Hawthorn?
In short, yes, I do think that we could have work out where the priority is in that precinct and list out what the options are for the city to explore. Definitely, we can definitely do that within 12 months. A lot of the background work has already been done, as you mentioned.
And then, as part of my original question about whether we could have the map of the area in question with the deficient zone highlighted, could we also just have some high-level dot points to say the city will be exploring private land purchase opportunities, roads to reserve opportunities, potential long-term lease of private land opportunities, or whatever administration feels is still worthy of being explored in that 12-month period. Thank you very much, Director. Councillors, Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Look, just probably some follow-up questions to that. In relation to note 2.1, based on what we've been discussing, is that how it's expressed? Do we feel that that is binding enough, or how binding is that on council in 12 months, 24 months time, that money has been put aside for that particular area? Because I'm just wondering about the wording that really just says ideally in areas of shortfall, and do we feel that that is enough, is binding enough, I suppose, to say it will be spent in that area?
Executive Manager, you're taking that question. I don't know if I've ever seen the word ideally in a council resolution before.
We can look at rewording it to give it a little bit more strength in respect to the objective. Through the chair.
Okay, thank you. And also just probably a procedural question in relation to how this item and item 5.5 work together. Am I right in assuming that they're dependent on each other, and if one is accepted and the other is not, that we have to go back to the drawing board?
Through the chair, yes. The objective of the sale would be for the city to realise as much funds as it could in respect to being able to then use those funds for creating public open space, clearly limiting the development use by not approving the rezoning would then drive a different outcome.
So is there a concern that we potentially could deal with item 5.4 before item 5.5, and that might change the council's feeling on item 5.4? I'm just trying to get a sense of how we would deal with a situation where one passed and the other didn't.
Can I just say, I do understand the question. I think that potentially it would be best to deal with item 5, or the 9.5 next week. It would be best to deal with that first. And then in addition to that, perhaps it also needs to refer to that in 5.4 that says approves the disposal of the city's lot pursuant to section such and subject to the rezoning under the scheme, so that the two are further linked. Because if you read in isolation, you could sell the land as is my reading of that recommendation.
Through the chair, yes, we can reword that to make it a bit more precise in respect to the sale of the land would be subject to realising an amount subject based on the rezoning being approved.
And do you agree we should perhaps reverse the order in the agenda? I know that we can do that on the night.
I think that's a reasonable approach. Through the chair.
Thank you.
Anything further, Councillor Castle? Okay, Councillor Loden?
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just a further query about the additional works done within the public open space. There's the park, the playground, which is effectively a replacement of the one being removed, but then further works proposed in terms of a park and so forth. I just wanted to understand where that sort of came from as a concept. Was that something that originated as an outcome of this, or was there previous work that this is identified as a need for the city, and this is now the opportunity to provide some funding towards that need?
Councillor Loden, I might ask the Director of Infrastructure to answer that question, because I believe the intent was always to complete the path. Director of Infrastructure.
Yeah, good evening, Mayor Cole. That's correct. There's two play areas there in close proximity. One's actually on the sale on the site of 26. So they are, scheduled for replacement at some time. And the Mayor's correct. We did install some paths there in Brentham Street with lighting, and this would be a continuation of that path. So I think it's a mixture of renewals required, and obviously by removing the sale would mean the loss of one playground. We'd replace it with a better playground. If that makes sense. And then it's so that there is a component of renewal versus new in this then. Yeah, I think we'd end up, we've kind of got two play areas in close proximity. We'd end up with one good play area. So it's renewal, and it's, we're reducing our asset demand by having one good play area rather than two in close proximity. So I think even if we weren't, this wasn't something we were considering or council were considering in terms of sale of the land, we'd be looking at, is it sensible to have two play areas so close together? And the answer probably is no, it's not. So we'd look to one location. So that that would be the outcome of this potentially. Thank you. And then just on the previous discussion around the use of the funds, I'd be keen to, and I'll come up with some words to put an amendment just to include a request that administration provide a proposal for how those funds will be utilised prior to the sale, or in conjunction with the sale. And I'm happy to take some guidance on the words, but I'll put something to, through to the director and the CEO on that, and seek some.
Happy to assist in the wording for that amendment.
Councillor, I'm not sure if you've ever been down to Bentham Street Reserve to see the first part of the path that's been completed. It does sort of take you to one of the cul-de-sacs, but really for it to be, if you'd actually be able to walk that entire greenway and connect up with Leaderville, the continuation of the path would take you all the way through the greenway to Burke Street. So if you are walking to Leaderville, it means you can walk through parkland under trees for a large stretch from Mount Hawthorn through to Burke Street. I'm trying to answer your question as opposed to deliberate, but just to say that has been quite heavily used by people like Rosewood, because you can't have wheelchairs and unstable walking surfaces for elderly people. It's worth having a look.
Thank you.
Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Warner.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just really curious about this quite overwhelming 94% people anti the sale. So I'm keen to know more about what they're actually opposing. Are they just opposing the sale of this, or has this option been put out to more people, such as the people around Wiley Place and the other residents of the area who would maybe be benefiting from the sale of this, as opposed to just the school population who are just thinking we need to hold on to this at all at all costs. So I'm just keen to know how broad basically that consultation was.
Through the chair, the consultation was relatively broad in respect to the proximity to the playground, but the overwhelming, from what I understand, response was from community members of the school, not happy in respect to that land being sold and that play space no longer being an opportunity for children that use the school.
And I can completely understand why they would feel like that, but I also would like to know maybe if it had been brought out to people in the northwest of Mount Hawthorn who might then benefit from a open space coming their way, or the people down near the Wiley Place Park who would use that. If those people had been consulted with, if they'd had an opportunity to, I know everyone's had an opportunity, but if they had been maybe more engaged to actually speak what they think about this, then it might not be a 94% no, it might be much more even.
I think just on that, the city has experienced difficulties in just saying we would like to sell this lot under our public open space strategy without giving concrete benefit back to the community. So the attempt to include a landscape plan with the new playground and the footpath to the very local community, and the attempt to actually demonstrate to the community that this funds would go towards public open space in a specific area. I think that's something that we've learnt, that we need to actually demonstrate direct benefit to community. At the time that this was advertised, we did not do that. So that's part of the issue. Secondly, because I have met with Aaron Moore, understand that the loss of the playground equipment itself was incredibly important to the children. And so the provision of new equipment is quite critical from their perspective. And one of the other questions was, whilst the existing equipment is 17 years old, if we were to offer it to the school, if they wanted it, if it still has some value to them, I just wanted to check whether that was still an option as well. That's just some of the context about what was advertised at the time versus the proposal before us. Did you want to add anything, Theo or Executive Manager?
Through the chair, I think the questions raise a good point in respect to us considering our strategic consultation is to look at the bigger picture and what stakeholders we need to consult. And it may be that the stakeholders aren't just the local community. And the bigger question was the outcome of the sale would benefit other parts of the community. So it does beg that question of us thinking more deeply in respect to our consultation processes.
We're always learning. We're always learning. I just find anything that's got such an overwhelming 94% community vote on it basically is quite frightening and quite alarming. So if there's a way to make sure that that 94% is actually reflective of the entire community is always a good thing.
Yes. And this brings me to another question, whether there is an opportunity. I know that there's contact has been made with Aaronmore Primary School. Obviously, there's been a lot of contact with both Aaronmore and Rosewood as the adjoining neighbours. Has there been any opportunity to get further feedback from the school in relation to the proposal to have a landscape plan and a renewed playground?
Thank you, Mayor. Discussions were held with the principal of the primary school late last year in respect to the potential of, from funds derived from the sale of building a more appropriate playground which would accommodate their needs in that space, in the reserve opposite. The principal was amenable to that. We've since council's decision in December have consulted with Aaronmore, Sisters of Mercy, the Catholic Archdiocese in respect to their interest in acquiring the land. There is no interest in acquiring the land. I did attempt to speak to the principal prior to this item going up to advise her what the item was. I did email it to her, but she was on leave. And she did commit to contact me when she returns from leave to further discuss where the item is going. So every endeavour has been made to make sure that the school is informed.
Is it possible that we speak with her before Tuesday's meeting?
I'm hoping to do so.
Okay, if you could provide us an update, that would be much appreciated. Councillor Warner, anything further?
Excuse my ignorance as well. The Rosewood Group, how likely is that? Is that a strong possibility here? Because I think that might be a great solution to things, potentially. But so are we looking at putting this out for sale where it could theoretically become an apartment block, or are we really have a good prospective buyer here with the Rosewood Group?
Peter, do you want to talk through the tendering process?
Thank you, Mayor. It will be a public tender. We'll try to advertise it as widely as we can, including potentially making sure that local real estate agents are aware of it. It's about, and including the adjoining landholders in Rosewood. It'd be a competitive process. Essentially what will occur is that we will receive tenders in respect to it. We'll have in consideration of that what the market value is. When it's presented back to council to consider the outcome of that tender, not only will council be considering the tender prices, but depending on the selection criteria, and we'll look at that very carefully, you're also looking at the best community outcome for that sale. And so you'll weigh up not only the weighting on the prices, but also with the potential development outcome in respect to that sale. And if council decides that the submission or tender by Rosewood is the best outcome overall in respect to price and development outcome, then that's a decision for council to make at the time.
Thank you. I appreciate being schooled in this to know that it's not just based on price, it's based on community benefit as well. So thank you.
We might also just go to the Director of Strategy and Development just to talk about what R60 zoning would permit.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. Essentially, it would permit the same outcome as you can see in the residential properties around it. So it's a two-storey height limit. Multiple dwellings would be permitted, but obviously only one above the other, so two on top of each other. So it's still two-storey height limit. Generally, it would be group dwellings in all likelihood, similar to what you see in the area.
So isn't it 3 stories in that R60 zoning? Sorry, you're on mute. You're on mute, Director.
Yeah, I'll confirm that for you, but my understanding is it's 2 stories, the same as what is in that location. So it's not about the R coding, it's about the location.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions on this item? Just Director of Infrastructure, I just did have that question about the play equipment. If the school did want it, even though it's 17 years old, could we still gift it to them if the sale went ahead?
Michael, so I'll take that on notice and I'll check the condition and whether that's possible, if that's okay.
Thank you. No further questions? All right, we'll go directly to item 5.5, given that it's interrelated. So that is Amendment 8 to Local Planning Scheme number 2 for 26 Bentham Street, Leederville. Any questions on this item? Okay, all been answered. Okay, thank you, councillors. I'll go back to the beginning of the agenda and just work through the items sequentially. So item 5.1, number 31, Smith Street, Highgate, proposed alterations and additions to place of worship. Any questions? Okay. Item 5.2, number 188 Vincent Street, North Perth, proposed alterations and additions to a second place of worship. Any questions? Okay. Item 5.3, number 3, Alma Road, Mount Lawley, proposed group dwelling amendment to an existing approval. Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the Director, I'm just wondering about the original application and to what extent any plantings on the roof terrace were a consideration in the overall landscaping requirements that warranted approval.
Through you, Mayor Cole, perhaps I'll take that, Manager of Development and Design. The roof terrace area provided fixed planter boxes. Primarily that was to achieve a screening outcome because there were some visual privacy concerns. It was not so much about contribution to landscaping as its primary purpose. There was commentary included in the report on page 53 of your agenda, just before the consultation and advertising section. It basically sets out the total amounts of existing deep soil or approved deep soil areas and canopy coverage, and that even with the removal or the amendments proposed and the removal of the rooftop terrace area, it would still achieve the minimum amounts of deep soil and canopy cover as required under our built form policy.
Councillor Hallett, anything further? Councillors, any questions on Alma Road? Okay. The next item is 5.6, rescinding of policy number 4.1.23, State Administrative Tribunal. Any questions? Okay. Item 5.7, advertising of amended policy number 7.5.3, Education and Care Services. Any questions on this item? Councillor Gondaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just have a question in relation to the additional provisions in relation to the location of care services and also the ground floor, like not having them on a ground floor in a district centre and so on, and then like the outdoor area requirements. I'm just keen to get an indication. It's a bit like when we were talking about the election signs last month. It's like if we put this policy in place as it stands now and we looked at our existing childcare centres, would any of those get approved? Or like I know that there's the potential for them to get approved, but are we overall through the implementation of this policy essentially saying that childcare in Vincent is going to be on the first floor and above or in commercial zones and mixed use zones only?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I don't have a list of, I suppose, the childcare centres currently and what would be deemed to comply under this policy. However, I can give some information on the clauses that have been amended and the reasoning. I think that it was due to the initial consultation that we have done and trying to ensure that the outdoor play spaces and I suppose the external playing space and the location of the centre overall is compatible with the surrounding uses, specifically in those more sensitive uses such as residential.
Yeah, I think it would just be really good to look at some of our childcare centres that do function, that in terms of, and also some of the policy settings around not having parking or outdoor play spaces, maybe in adjacent to sensitive uses. I appreciate that these are very challenging applications to approve, and I do think that having additional policy guidance is warranted, but I ultimately think we do approve them and have approved them and have childcare centres that are run in these sort of settings. So I guess I'm just keen to get some overarching information, like even just a sort of a selection of childcare premises and how they would then be assessed that already exist and how they may be assessed under these sort of policy. not necessarily an exhaustive list at all, but I think that would be a useful exercise. And the other question I had was in relation to the definition of a family daycare service needing to run out of more than one dwelling. So my understanding of that is that a single family daycare centre can't operate unless it is registered with a family daycare service. Is that correct? Because we don't have a definition within there in relation to just family, like the policy team seems to talk about a family daycare service, which is something that's run out of more than one premises. So I'd just like some clarification on that. Is the intention that family daycare should all be run through a family daycare service, which would mean like that family daycare operator needing to register, and is that the way that that sort of childcare is run at the moment?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I don't believe that is the intention, because it can be from a family daycare residence or an approved family daycare venue, but I will confirm that in the briefing notes.
Thank you. It's entirely possible I've misread it, but that was my notes, so I thought I'd ask.
If I just might add through you, Mayor Cole, those definitions are set out in the scheme, so and they're model scheme provision definitions, so they're definitions that the state government has essentially set out as being required, but we can clarify exactly what they mean practically.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Thank you, Councillor Gonchevsky. Understand that Councillor Apollo has joined the meeting. Oh, hello, Councillor Apollo, I see you now. We're just dealing with item 5.7.
Thank you. Apologies.
No problem. Questions on this item, councillors? I did have a couple of questions. Some of them were answered as I continued to move through the policy, so I won't ask those ones. It does say in the policy that there should be something like 30% shade in outdoor areas with a preference for natural shade. But I just wondered whether the policy should actually include canopy requirements.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can definitely investigate that and add that in.
I just because these are possibly in town centres or commercial, I think the canopy requirement is going to be different. So if we could actually bring that 30% canopy across to the specific play area, that I think would be beneficial. I wondered whether there should also be a bit more discussion on access to natural light and ventilation. Security, I believe, was covered off by issues like fencing height, so I think that's probably covered. Under the objectives, it does talk about protecting the privacy of the adjoining landowners, but I think the privacy of the children is probably something that could be mentioned in the objectives also. And I was also just wondering whether there was any consideration to issues such as minimum room sizes, and understanding maximum occupancy is probably coming through licensing, but should we, as part of good design, be talking about, minimum room sizes? No, it's hard to do that if you don't know how many children there are per room. That might be getting too specific, but I just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, to you, Mayor Cole, on all of those items, we can definitely look at that. I would probably just note on that last item, we would be seeing a lot of applications coming through before those numbers are known, but we could possibly add a note on that. I will investigate and update the policy.
Thank you. I also just wanted to ask, because there have been such significant changes in childcare, moving from sort of that, say, 35 to 50 children up to more the sort of 100, 120. Was there any desktop research into policy in other Australian cities, for example, around childcare centre planning and any views on whether maximum numbers overall should be set? Just noting that significant shift we've seen to centres of 100 plus.
To you, Mayor Cole, yes, we definitely did do a lot of desktop research to have a look at other policies nationally. We probably are looking at making sure that the objectives that we have set out ensure that we don't have that adverse impact to the surrounding areas and the people that are residing or working and visiting those surrounding areas. So we're looking to make sure that those objectives ensure that those adverse impacts do not happen, rather than being specific on the set maximum amount of numbers.
So I guess I'm also the question is probably really coming from the place of the optimal environment for children in childcare also, about whether, I don't want to put a name on it, but say like something that might be seen as a super centre with many, many children. Is that something where there's any planning policies in other jurisdictions around optimal sizes for childcare centres that we could be briefed on or would be relevant to the planning aspects?
To you, Mayor Cole, we didn't come across any of those, but we'll have another look to see if there are some examples that we can provide in the briefing notes.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thanks. Sorry, one more question. It was I think that in the policy it talks about residential being considered if it's adjacent to a commercial use. Just wanted to check in relation to like if it may not be a commercial use, but it may be a non-residential use, like a a park or I guess, or a place of worship or something like that that's already within. So that because I presume the intention is around minimising the impact on residences, or having like things grouped together. And so I just would, I guess, be grateful of any advice as to why that wasn't included.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think that raises a good point. It is the intent is definitely, as you have presumed, that it is so that a centre is not placed with only residential completely surrounding it. So we will review if there's a possibility to, I suppose, make that a little bit more open.
That's actually a very good example, Councillor Gonchevsky, because I know that the Macedonian Church had been looking at offering childcare within their centre, which is sort of placed within a residential area by a park. So we do have a live example of that one. Councillors, any further questions? Just following on from that question from Councillor Gonchevsky, I also wondered whether activity corridors should also just more generally be considered. Wasn't really sure. Well, you're not sort of necessarily in a commercial area, but you are on an activity corridor somewhere like, say, for example, Oxford Street, or yeah, that's probably what I was thinking. I was just interested in your views on that, Manager.
To you, Mayor Cole, I think the intent around that was to ensure that I guess that high level of activity and high level of activity of the centre would not be at odds, but that is something that we can also look into.
I'm not sort of advocating for that. I was just interested in pros and cons. So, yeah, thank you. Any further questions on this item? Okay. Taking us to item 5.8, City of Vincent Rebound Plan Quarterly Update. Any questions? No questions? Can I just ask a few? I'm happy for you to take these on notice. I just jotted down some notes as I was reading through. I was just interested to know where the minor nature development policy review is at, what the status of that is, and also the status of the economic development strategy, I was interested to know whether we are arranging for COVID conversations to be broadcast more widely to the community, which was the body of work that came up through the COVID relief arts grants. And I was also interested in the status of the pop-up play initiative at Edinburgh Street Park. So happy for those just to be taken on notice if that's easiest. I was also just interested to know whether by next week, council might be able to just get a sort of an update on how the events grants funding is going, whether we're receiving any interest whatsoever at this very difficult time. Because the report does talk about whether we move to an annual grants funding process for that. And I was also interested to know whether any of the previous responses that we've relied upon during COVID may need to be reconsidered again. We looked at sort of doing things a little bit differently, for example, in the library, mystery bags, business advice and assistance. I assume that's continuing, and even issues like looking at leadable gardens, if we're going to see a sort of shift in need over the next 4 to 6 weeks.
You, Michael, I can answer some of those. The minor nature development policy is being prepared and will be presented to council through the policy paper in the coming months within this financial year. The economic development strategy is planned to be the next step following the Vincent Rebound Plan. So the Vincent Rebound Plan, as we can see, ends at the end of this financial year, and so we are looking to, I suppose, assess where we are with COVID-19 and what is required. Any of the, I suppose, ongoing actions or things that we would like to develop to ensure that we are having a bit more of a sustained and as well as a very adaptive approach to both COVID-19 response as well as economic development in general. Putting a big emphasis on our town centres and how we want those to be really viable into the future. So we are looking at starting the, I suppose, the project plan for the economic development strategy so that that can follow on from the Vincent Rebound Plan. With the COVID conversation, yes, absolutely, we are definitely looking into lots of different options on how we can I suppose, repurpose or highlight those at different events and activations that we will do. So we're looking at those opportunities, and they will come to you when we have some discussions around some specific activations that are planned into the future. The pop-up play and the update on the event grant funding, I will take on notice and put into the briefing notes. And on the last point, yes, absolutely, we're really trying to understand, I suppose, what businesses and the wider community need with the ever-changing environment that we're in at the moment, kind of recognising that it's a whole new situation that people are finding themselves in at the moment, yet again. So we're trying to make sure that we're very available for people with what they need. Some of those examples of the library providing workshops on how to download the required apps and things like that, as well as trying to get out into the town centres, doing online things more frequently, such as the business e-news, trying to get that out on a more frequent basis and make sure that the content in that is aligned with what the businesses require.
Thank you very much, Manager. And also just noting the parklet for the free trial is still continuing, so that might also be worth a plug in the business news. I saw Manager of Business and Finance, Community and Business pop up. Did you want to add something there?
Oh, thanks, Nicole. Yeah, I was just going to add a very quick update in terms of library services. So what we're trying to do with the library and the community centre is, as much as we can, keep business as usual, adapting for things like numbers of people in programs. And we're trying not to wind back or alter those programs at the moment, but the library's monitoring how many people are coming through the door. And if we're noticing a drop-off in numbers, we're looking at whether we can supplement that with delivery of book bags and things like that, which we did during the lockdown previously. So it's very much a live environment at the moment, and we're assessing it as we go.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. I just a follow-up request to your comments that I just wonder if it's possible between now and next week to get a broad or a high-level health check on how our businesses are coping at the moment, given that things are quite changing and we're about to enter, they say, a 4-week, the worst of it. So I'm just wondering if we have a sense of whether they are, how they're struggling or not. As we used to get reports on that when we were dealing with this before the rebound plan, when the rebound plan was in its infancy. So it would be good just to have a check-in to see where they're sitting right now. And not, in addition to that, could we just get an update on the state of events in Vincent at the moment? I think we've all seen a number of cancellations recently, and I just want to get a sense of if any things are still running, and that might help us direct some support if it's needed.
Absolutely.
Councillor Castle, I did get an update from our planning, our events officer this morning, and it is changing on a daily basis almost. So we actually did have St Patrick's Day confirmed that they would need to cancel again for the 3rd year, which is really hard on them. And that was actually predated the Thursday announcement. That was really based on sentiment and registration ticket sales. We have had Florida Athena advise that they're going to be holding an event this Sunday, but that was actually before the new restrictions were announced. So we're also just tick-tacking with them. RTRFM have Neon Picnic. They are now looking into whether it's still possible and how they might manage that. But I think, was there another event that was just cancelled? I think that was the guts of the update, but it's really, the stage 2 restrictions have had an impact, but then I think community sentiment over the next month is also having an impact.
Yeah, that's my sense. It would be good to just have a summary of that, I suppose.
Yeah.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I just might give an update as of lunchtime today in relation to Picnic on the Pitch, the Florida Athena event at Lidder Stadium. So they are still planning to go ahead, but with reduced numbers. That's this Saturday, reduced numbers to the 500 maximum. So they are planning to go ahead as of lunchtime today. They were, and they were planning on complying with the new requirements, which set a maximum of 500, capacity of 500. So that update would be out of date by Tuesday next week. So I thought I'd provide it now.
Can I also say I was going to give you a brief update on what I'm aware of with Edinburgh Reserve pop-up play, because we had a report on this in the Children and Young People Advisory Group, that they're following a survey and meeting with parks. The plan is now to install obstacle course style pop-up in the park, but I don't have a time frame on that. So hopefully Tara will be able to give us more detail.
Thank you, that sounds very fun. Councillors, any further questions on the rebound plan? Okay. Next item is 5.9, advertising of new policy, draft vibrant public spaces policy. Questions, Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm assuming this might be for the manager. Can administration tell me about how they arrived at the 15% green planting amount for the non-pop-up parklets?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that was a balance of trying to create a level of greenery, as well as not imposing too much, I suppose, onerous or cost on the applicant. I suppose we're trying to strike a balance of having some really great outcomes that hit the objectives that we would like, but we'd really like to also encourage and enable businesses or applicants to complete these applications, just noting, I suppose, that the environment that we're in and that these we don't want cost to be a barrier for people to invest in our public realm.
Thank you. There was a comment in the community consultation feedback about dead plants. How does administration ensure that plantings in parklets are adequately maintained?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the maintenance of the parklets will be the responsibility of the applicant. So we are proposing that there is, I suppose, overarchingly with this policy and the processes that are behind it, that there is just a little bit more detail and guidance. So you'll see that it's quite a detailed policy, and we're hoping that that is so that people understand the expectations, they understand the process, and not just the process once the piece of infrastructure is installed, but ongoing. So that is how we're going to try and combat that.
Okay, thank you. I'm just wondering about the rationale for having the same fees for a parklet, which is available to the public at all times, and an eatlet, which privatises the space for the duration of a business's operating hours, which for some might be every day, 7 days a week.
For you, Matt Cole, that's a really good point. The fees were determined based on the cost to, I suppose, the taking into consideration the cost output that would give to the applicant, but mostly the cost to the city if we were to be required to remove the structure. So although the structure is open for different hours of the day, noting that an eatlet is available to the public when the business is closed, it would be the same cost to the city if we were having to require to, I suppose, do works around that structure.
And I guess the cost is an initial application fee. There's not an ongoing annual fee. For the ones that might be foregoing parking, has that calculation been included in foregone parking revenue?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, it hasn't been, because we're not proposing that any parking has been included as a location requirement in this policy. So where parking is at a capacity level of 85% or higher within the 400-metre walkable catchment of the structure, it actually wouldn't meet the objectives. So we're saying that therefore it would not able to be installed, or it would not be approved. So we are not considering parking within the fee structure due to this.
And just, is there any intent to revise these fees if we move beyond the scope of the rebound plan timeline, given that is meant to be a temporary COVID response?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, absolutely. Yes, these are the fees that we would be seeing in the long term. We would propose that these fees are included in the fees and charges, noting that that would only be once the policy is approved. But the rebound plan action of the zero parklet fees for a period of time could be extended if that was further action of the rebound plan. It could also be extended in the fact of time, but also in relation to more structures than just the parklet, if that's what council were wanting to do.
Great, thank you. Nothing further.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I had a similar question about the parklet versus eatlet. So is it right to say that the only difference is the exclusivity of use?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I suppose that main difference comes with a few other differences, with the fact that the reason for the exclusivity of use is because the eatlet is associated to that food and beverage business that can be licensed. So the eatlet can be licensed, whereas the parklet cannot, which therefore means that during that period of time, yes, it is exclusive to the patrons of that business. And therefore, whereas the parklet would be open to the public at all times. So that is the main difference, but due to that, there are some of those smaller differences as well.
So would there be any existing parklets that would qualify to be converted to an eatlet? And is that an option that's available to businesses? I'm thinking particularly the ones in Leederville, outside Just Burgers and that section there, and Pincho's.
Through you, Mayor Cole, they would be required to.
Sorry.
That's okay. I was thinking it was me. They would be required to have their normal alfresco permit, and could that permit would still be in place. But yes, there are some examples of that.
So I suppose it's just a matter of how we deal with that, whether we make that known to those businesses, or how we approach those requests if they come through. I had another question. In the report, it refers to the waiving of the fees not being an incentive to install parklets. Have we got any sense of what the barriers actually are? Is it really just around the loss of parking? I'm just wondering, with the introduction of this fee structure, whether we will see any applications if they weren't even prepared to do it when it was free.
Through you, Mac, I'll just on the first point about the transitioning of the existing parklets, those that do meet kind of those criteria, we will be engaging them through initially the advertising period of the policy, and then if adopted, bringing them through that transitional process to ensure that they are kind of under that right category in the new process or the new policy. And then the comment around the fees, we have seen that the barrier is the cost of the design and the construction of the structure itself. So if you look at the cost of the proposed fees that we're giving for the approval, that is quite minor in comparison to the cost that it would take to design and construct a structure that meets our objectives. So that is the barrier. It is still, I suppose, the fee. So in response to your question of how can we expect people to be applying, we're hoping that because we have really outlined the policy is a lot more detailed, it would be used not just as a tool to assess applications as they come in, but it would also be used as a promotional piece to go out to say to people that this is an option to them. And we're hoping that because it is quite clear on what they can and can't do, they would probably feel that they can go through that process of getting that design because they understand a little bit more clearly what the outcome will be, and that investment may be worthwhile as they can clearly see that they meet the objectives, and this is something that would most likely be realised.
And so the process of coming up with that design, is that something that we would assist businesses with anyway? I mean, we have a number of examples already. Would it be, would they have the option to really just piggyback off an existing design so as not to have to incur substantial fees to have something new and different?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, absolutely. I think that's a really great way of especially simple structure design to go. That's very accessible to people online, even to have a design like that. People can see, I think, a lot of great examples throughout Vincent that they could definitely encourage them to copy if it meets the objectives. I think that it's probably more to the point that they can now hopefully see that those examples would be able to be realised, because the intent of the policy is that it is very clear on what our objectives are, what the process is, and therefore they would have some confidence that they meet those and the investment is worthwhile.
Thank you. Just a couple more. You just mentioned before that to satisfy or to be eligible to have a parklet, that they could not be more than 85% capacity in parking zones within 400 metres. Are we confident that that doesn't rule out all of our town centres?
Through you, Mac Cole, yes, we definitely are at this point in time. I'm just checking, but there is, at present the city doesn't have any areas that are above that 85% occupancy. So we are confident that at this point in time, that wouldn't rule out anywhere.
Okay, and just last one, in the comments on the in the report, that it refers to some research from the City of Yarra and their experience of the benefits to the business. And I'm just wondering how this has been, or if it's been communicated to businesses, whether our place managers are having those conversations to say, to perhaps get over a perceived barrier to demonstrate the benefit to the business, not just to the town centre?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, absolutely. That was the main part of the initial consultation that we did prior to or throughout the drafting of this policy. So we did quite extensive consultation out in the existing parklets to understand people's sentiment around the spaces, what they kind of see. I think a lot of the things that were coming up around the publicly accessible element of the structures. We initially didn't get a large amount of feedback, so the place planners did directly go to businesses to get their feedback on, I suppose, the barriers, and also hearing a lot about the positives of what people see in these spaces, and that will be continued through the consultation of the policy itself.
Thank you. And I know I said that was the last one, but I've got one more. And forgive me if this is covered in the policy. I'm just wondering if we've set out a position that perhaps sets a maximum number of parklets in a particular zone, because obviously that would change the environment if we've got parklets everywhere, and presumably the relative benefit goes down and the impact to parking goes up.
Through you, Mayor Cole. No, we don't have a maximum, because I suppose the objectives that we've put in place, if people are able to meet those, if we're still able to ensure, especially like mentioned before, that parking requirement, the adverse impact of too many parklets, I wouldn't see there being that adverse impact, because they're meeting all of those objectives. We had, I think, in order to meet all of the objectives, you're not providing that adverse impact, because that locational requirement regarding the car parking would be that main one, and that wouldn't be, that's, I guess, that threshold, that's when the application wouldn't be continued, because of that requirement for it to be a parking space. But other than that, I actually think it would be a positive impact to have a series of spaces in the one space. A lot of the kind of research, or the people that we were speaking to over East that have gone through these processes have had great success when those parklets are actually in an area, because it creates that atmosphere, and it creates kind of that, I guess, awareness as well, that, hey, these places are all able to be for the public, because it's not just that one space, that we're not really sure how that works. But on that, there will obviously be the parklet signage that you see in the current parklets updated for the eatlets and the parklets, so that people understand that it is publicly accessible.
Okay, thank you.
Councillors. Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you. Yeah, that was one of my questions too, in relation to setting some sort of upper limit. I understand the comment in relation to parklets. I'd be grateful for some advice on if council was of a view to potentially establish some sort of maximum in relation to eatlets, as to where that might be accommodated within the current policy structure. I also wanted to, following on from Councillor Hallett's question in relation to plant maintenance, etc., I just wanted to find out what processes the city will follow in relation to monitoring and compliance of and enforcement of approved or unapproved structures, I guess, is probably more the point.
Through you, Mayor Cole, on the first point regarding the eatlets, if council was wanting that to be a maximum that would fit within the that specific kind of section of the policy, which is that point 4 when we talk about the eatlets specifically, and there could be a requirement around that. The reason that wasn't done was because the space, although it is only accessible to those that are visiting the business within opening hours, it does provide a investment in the public realm and a space outside of those hours that would not normally be there if we were to make a maximum for the eatlets. I suppose the thought was what wouldn't be there if we put a cap on those eatlets would that provide a higher amenity than the amenity that would be provided outside of the operating hours for the eatlets itself? So that was the reasoning that we feel that the investment in the public realm, both outside of opening hours for the public and also, I suppose, those other benefits of the people on the street and the eyes on the street and things like that with the eatlets within operating hours was a positive thing. But if council wanting to include that, it could be within the locational requirements.
So, for example, you could have something along the lines of like that the public realm, the majority of the public realm should not be privatised. So, for example, so that essentially the balance would always tip towards either the maintenance of the status quo or the development of a public space for public purpose. Would that be, I guess I'd be grateful for I mean, I can certainly come up with a form of words myself, but having done the research in this space and been immersed in it for a long time, I suspect administration may have a form of words that may be less clunky, but I'm happy to work with you or to take guidance on that. But I would probably foreshadow some additional direction in relation to the privatisation of the public realm before next week. My next question relates to so my understanding is in relation to, for example, parks and reserves, that within this policy, a park and reserve would still be covered under the vibrant public spaces policy, but would be an other proposal. And so on the basis of reading this policy, someone may feel that the city's position was that they were willing to go forward with process, receiving an application. Someone might do some thinking, engage with administration, etc., and go through the preliminary part of the process, pay a design fee, an application fee, and lodge an application. And I guess, so is that correct? So that someone could say, for example, I'd like to, I have an apartment block that's adjacent to a park and I'd like to build a cafe and I'd like to pave that a portion of your park for my cafe. And that would be a proposal that this policy would sort of provide a structured approach to receiving. Is that correct?
Through you, Michael, yes, that's absolutely correct. And those proposals would be presented to council for consideration.
Yeah, and so council's involvement would be quite a way down the road though, wouldn't it?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it is proposed at the moment that it would be in determining the approval of that.
So if council wanted to have a view that private development on parks and reserves should not be encouraged or facilitated unless it was something that was say operating out of a council lease, for example, or through a temporary permit process, what would need to be changed in this policy, and how would that need to be changed? Would it be a change to objectives, or should the scope of the policy be changed to remove the private development on public parks and reserves?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the policy would have to probably change in a couple of areas to change the process of that. Noting like that they would only progress, we would only progress with those applications if they met the objectives and the design requirements that are within that area of the policy. So if they did go through with that, then they would, yes, we would have to, then it would then go through that application process, and then it would come to council if council was of the view that they did not see that any of these structures should be even considered in those reserves and public open spaces, then we would be just unticking that specific area, and that would show that none of these applications would be even considered or gone through the process at all, no matter what the structure is. It would be on that table 1 that you see in the policy. If you were of the thought that you didn't want to consider those at all, but if you wanted to change the process of how those were considered, then the policy will kind of change in a few steps of where that process is and how that's determined.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and so also just in relation to the what's the process if someone was to apply for something under this policy and it was to be refused? Is there a right of appeal through this policy, or what's the mechanism? It's not sat, is it?
Through you, Mayor Cole, for all of the space types besides the other proposal, it's not a development application at all. So we would just go back to them with the feedback that we had and ask them to resubmit. And if it was another proposal, we would be ensuring that they meet those objectives, working with them through that, and then being determined by council. They could then go back and make changes to that application and then resubmit their application. But as it is our land, there's no right of appeal.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, just in terms of the enforcement policy, yeah, how does that one work?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll take that one on notice.
I might just add through you, Mayor Cole, the rangers, we do have community rangers out there in our town centres all the time. So really it would come down to the priorities that they have around enforcing the policy. So if the policy was in place and it was clear that there was a requirement for the maintenance of a particular proportion of landscaping, 15%, whatever it may be, and we asked the rangers to check that regularly and enforce that requirement, that's something that could be done quite simply, because the rangers are out there all the time talking to businesses every day, walking up and down the streets. So yeah, I think it would be quite straightforward. It really just comes down to whether that's a policy provision and a requirement or not.
I think more I was talking about, like, so if someone was to just build something that wasn't hadn't been approved, would the policy be that, because I guess would the enforcement approach be that because there is this policy and it is something that could potentially be approved at the end of the process, that essentially that development on public land would be allowed to be retained while the approval application and approval process and appeals and going backwards and forwards, etc., was happening, as sort of sometimes happens with development applications, where because it is potentially an approvable use or structure or whatever, that the enforcement policy allows it to be retained while an application is occurring. Would that be the approach? Or, for example, if the policy had a provision that sort of set out how the enforcement of unapproved structures would be handled, would that provide sufficient guidance to allow for, I guess, an expedited enforcement approach?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, that's a good question. I think, in short, compliance-wise, our approach has historically been where there's not a risk to safety, and there is an opportunity for a development on city land that, say, doesn't require a planning approval. So it's not covered by that process and the policy that we have. We would approach it in the same way. We would allow it to continue while the application and the assessment is considered and determined. So that would be our approach in this instance. If council had a view to essentially require those structures to be removed until an approval is in place in every instance, then that would certainly be something we would need to have in policy.
Nothing further, thank you.
Councillors, Councillor Hallett.
Apologies, one further. Just wondering if there's any implications for development approvals for businesses in terms of increasing their patron numbers through adding additional floor space. Would they only be allowed to have these additional people if it was within their current maximums, or is this an addition? And does that then have a flow on that we might get applications from those businesses to increase patron numbers?
Through you, Mayor Cole, because it is located on the city's land, it would not provide additional floor space for those businesses.
So even if it increased demand and some of those considerations were what put the maximum numbers of patrons in their development application, that wouldn't matter.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that is correct. It would be considered in the same way as an alfresco is. It's an additional area, but it is not an area that would change their maximum numbers.
Councillors, probably some of this may overlap with questions that have already been asked, but I'm really interested in the tenure for eatlets and how that compares to the existing tenure arrangements we have for exclusive use, and the permanency of the structures, maintenance and removal. So one of the questions that we've had as this policy has sort of been discussed or developed is what happens in a situation where the city needs to do roadworks, or there's resurfacing, or there's pipes for Perth, for example. We recently had a situation in Oxford Street where a parklet wasn't removed. Do we need to have a non-removal fee? And if we do have permanent structures, how are those issues dealt with? Where it says that it's going on the existing road or new brick paved area, does that mean that the policy is contemplating building nodes in the road reserve for this purpose? And if there's just an establishment fee but no ongoing fee, are we effectively, would this policy effectively be approving permanent structures with, say, bricks and walls and glazing for ever after? And, you know, if at some point they're in the public realm, they're not maintained, who's responsible? Some of this is because we've been going through the growing asset sustainability process ourselves that we need to ask these questions.
To you, Mayor Cole, I can answer some of those. The design objectives, firstly, in regards to how the application looks or how the structure looks with its permanency, we would be looking for those design objectives to make sure that the structure is very permeable and people can see through it, and it's not those kind of strong walls that you cannot see through, and it feels like a very closed-in structure. And in regards to the comments around the permanency, more so if they are not complying, we would see that we would be able to revoke their agreement with the city and remove the structure. So that is the reason for the fees and charges of what they are, that would allow us that if we got to a point where a structure or an applicant of the structure was not complying and not upkeeping the structure in line with the agreement that they were received when they initially applied, we would be able to remove that agreement, and we would have the funds that they provided upon that application to remove the structure. In regards to the question around the platform, yes, in some instances, we have noted that the applicant could work with the city's engineering team into the extenuation of that footpath to have the level ground of the base of that structure.
There's just a few things there that does raise costing issues for me, because if the city is going to be doing the paving and the groundwork, that's a cost. And if the approval fee is intended to capture removal fees way off in the distance. I'm just wondering whether there actually needs to be a provision for making good or for removal in the event that the road reserve is needed to be maintained, etc., etc. It's questions that I've asked in the past, and I still am unsure about how that would be managed. And can I just get an idea about the sorts of types of permanent structures we could be looking at? Are we talking about brick structures built onto the road with glazing and roofs? And I just really would like to understand why an eatlet, which is exclusively used, would not then have an ongoing fee to cover some of the costs that the city could bear into the future.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we will not be expecting that any of the structures have solid walls, because that would not allow for it to be that kind of permeable space. That would not allow for the objective to be met, that it appears to be a welcoming, inviting space that is accessible to the public, whether that is a parklet through all times or an eatlet when the business is closed. The fees are reflected of that pure cost that we see for the city to pay to either remove the structure or make the structure good. It is not attached to whether it is the eatlet or the parklet, because it would be the same cost to the city to either remove the parklet if it became non-compliant, or we had a situation where roadworks were required, or any other situation that we probably that could come about. So the fee is directly related to the cost to the city to make good any issues that have arisen with the structure, or to remove the structure if the structure is not compliant, or if we need to remove it for any unforeseen works or circumstances.
So would a structure such as, so if we look at what is existing, would a structure such as spritzers or fresco structure be approved under this policy, or would that be seen to be too permanent and too solid?
Sorry, through you, Mayor Cole, the structure at Spritz under this policy would have to become under an eatlet, but the design itself would have to be reviewed under the objectives, and it would not meet those design objectives as we have outlined them in the policy itself. So I guess the use would be an eatlet, but the way that structure itself is designed and built, and the construction of it, would not be approved through this vibrant public spaces policy.
Okay, thank you. And then another example, if we look at the decking that's outside the Alfred Hotel, which is currently a leased area, would that be considered an eatlet under this policy, or would that still need to go through a leasing arrangement as it has done?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the enclosed deck at the Alfred would have been categorised as an eatlet, but it wouldn't be approved under this policy and would have to go through that same process.
I'm just unsure why, because that is quite open. Would it be a design issue, or would it be the size of the structure that would mean it wouldn't come through this policy?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it's the objectives that I suppose overarchingly it's the appearance of whether that looks like a space that can be accessed and used by the public. Through this policy, they would have only been permitted that fixed furniture, not the deck itself, because the design objectives of the eatlet, which is the category that it would come under, would not allow for that decking structure.
Okay. And then we had a proposal in an area on Oxford Street, which was a brick structure with glazing and a roof on the road reserve. Is that, or that wouldn't meet the design elements either? Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that would be considered as an eatlet with new paving.
An eatlet with new paving. Okay. and elements of bricks, etc., would not be permitted then? Is that, I'm sorry for all the questions. I'm just, because we've tried to grapple with this in the past, and I'm just trying to understand what would be in and what would be out. It might be, yeah, just trying to use a few examples to better understand it.
Through you, Michael, absolutely. It's not about, I suppose, the bricks themselves. It's about, and I should have been more clear before when I said the brick walls wouldn't be permitted. That's because of the wall-like structure of the fact that a brick wall is not permeable, is not able to be seen through, would not meet those design objectives. But if a structure was made out of brick and perhaps it was, you know, a small, you know, narrow base at the bottom, that would be something that would be different, because it would be able to meet those design objectives through that, because it would still be able to provide that legibility, which is one of those key objectives.
Yeah, thank you. I think you are getting a lot of questions tonight, so I think this is something we've tried to grapple with in the past around those key issues around tenure, permanency, how can it be removed, whose responsibility. So they're just the sorts of things I think we've been trying to grapple with. So I'll read it much more closely, but might just follow up with you during the week if I have any further questions. Councillors, any questions on urban spaces? Okay, thank you very much, Manager. You've done really well to answer all of those questions this evening. Okay, we don't have any infrastructure items this evening, so we'll move on to community and business services, item 7.1. Financial statements as at 31st of January 22. Any questions? Councillor Iapolo.
Thank you, Mayor. Question relates to the re-budget. I saw that this report on page 4 includes some year-to-date actual information regarding capital expenditure, and then I guess a proposed revised budget. And on the first table at item 5, it's got the year-to-date actual spend is 4.6 million, but we're the budget was 6.9, but it seems to indicate, if I'm reading it correctly, that administration wishes to increase the budget from 6.9 million to 23.5 million. Can I just have an explanation or clarification to my understanding of that?
Through you, Mayor Cole. Councillor Iapolo, are you on item 7.1, or have you skipped ahead to the budget items?
Yeah, I'm on item 7.1.
Okay. There shouldn't be any proposed changes to the budget in item 7.1.
So it's page of item 7.1, it's page 4.
The capital expenditure funding summary.
It's the table under item 5 of page 4.
Yep.
Capital expenditure, yeah, exactly. Capital expenditure and funding summary, and it's the actual spend in the first table for CapEx.
Yep.
Year to date is 4.6 million with a budget of 6.9, but it seems to this, if I'm reading this correctly, it would seem that administration is looking to increase the budget to 23 million. Is that
no.
Must be wrong?
Yeah, sorry. That so just to clarify through you, Mayor Cole, I think what might be confusing us is the title of revised budget. It actually refers to the current budget. I think what the finance team have done is that we have had one revised budget from the beginning of the year, which was our first quarter budget. And I think they're referring to the first quarter budget. Is that correct, Reece?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Yeah. So the 23.5 or 23.6 million is the current budget. I think it's just the heading is a little bit confusing there.
Okay, so it looks like the same issue about over budgeting of CapEx, but we'll leave that for another day. The only other...
Well, that's so, yeah, and sorry, through you, Mayor Cole, that the question of actually balancing that out will come to in the mid-year budget review item.
Yep, and I had one other question, sorry. Maybe come back to me, sorry, while I find it. Just give someone else a chance.
Councillors, someone want to fill the gap? Any burning questions on the financial statements? No, it's back to you, Councillor Oploy.
That's fine. I'll ask it next week.
Yep.
Can't find it. Thank you.
You're also very free to ask it via email at any time in the lead up as well. Okay, moving on then to item 7.2, authorisation of expenditure for January 1 to 31. Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you. Can I just get some more information in the briefing notes in relation to the energy monitoring project at the depot, which I think had an expenditure of 12,000, and also just the 24,000 in Christmas decoration, dismantling and storage for visual inspirations. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we'll include that in the briefing notes.
Thank you, Manager. Any further questions on expenditure? Okay, item 7.3, investment report as at 31st of January 22. Okay, we'll move on to the main event, 7.4, mid-year budget review. Questions on this item? Oh, okay. I can ask a couple. I was interested, given that we've had such a good run on solar, that we had an increase in our utility charges of 160,000. I also just wanted to get a little bit more information on the Beatty Park change rooms deferral to 23. I did see in the notes it talked about design this year, but I'm very keen to see that move forward. So I'd really like to get some more information about how long design will take and when works will happen. And just the leadable parade greening plan. Again, there was some commentary around being held up by black spot, but I was just seeking a little bit more around how those two are linked and how that will affect the design proposed for leadable parade and the greening. Yep. And when that project will start. Happy for those to be taken on notice. Councillors, Councillor Oploy.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just, I presume that recommendation should be reading where the reference in the first line is 2020 to 21. It should be 21 to 22.
Yes, it certainly should. Thank you very much for that, Councillor Oploy.
Thank you.
That's one of those ones through you, Mayor Cole. I think it's a wood for the trees. We didn't even see that.
So many numbers in that report.
I know. Yeah, we're looking at all of the really important numbers. Thank you for that.
Anything further, councillors? Okay, thank you for that. On to Chief Executive Officer items. 8.1, appointment of community members to the City of Vincent Audit Committee. Questions on this item? Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. I've just a question around the confidential attachments. I don't know if it's just me, but mine are mostly blank pages. So.
It's me too. So yes, I was also, I actually would like to discuss this item in the confidential, have to go to confidential because there's blank pages and I don't know what should be there. So are there any public questions on this item? We can do that towards the end of the meeting. Any public questions on this item? Okay, we will come back to that because I think we do have an issue there with the attachment. 8.2, minutes and motions of the annual meeting of electors held on the 2nd of February 2022. Any questions? 8.3, local government statutory compliance audit return 2021. Any questions? 8.4, report and minutes of the audit committee meeting on the 15th of February 22. And 8.5, information bulletin. Councillor Gonchevsky and then Councillor Loden.
Yeah, apologies. I probably should have picked this up last month, but I note in the Register of Council reports to be actioned. I don't think it's captured the resolution from, I think it was December, for the project plans for the asset prioritisation and levels of service projects to be presented to the council meeting in March 2022. I'm just wondering if that's still to come forward as a late item. Or not.
Anyone? To answer the question. Director of Infrastructure, you've been thrown in.
Yeah, obviously through my call, obviously asset management's in my area. I think I need to take that on notice. I do recollect that discussion, but I'll take it on notice and check.
Thank you very much. And then the other thing is that it talks about that we had a workshop on the 15th of February and we discussed cash in lieu of public open space and a proposed lease of car parking bays to an EV charge station operator. And I think I was a bit late, but I don't recall those being discussed. And when I searched the papers, I couldn't see either of those things there. So just wondering if we could perhaps update that to reflect what was talked about.
Through Mayor Cole, yes, they were potential agenda items which did not appear in the final agenda, so we'll update that attachment.
I have heard mention of this, but yes, it hasn't been formalised. I don't know. Is that something that will be coming to council to the next workshop? Okay. Was that everything, Councillor Gonchevsky? Okay, Councillor Layden.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I've possibly asked this before, but we don't have the development statistics in this info bulletin, and I was just wondering why that was.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, end of the month is yesterday, so that's the reason why we'll try and get it in for next week.
Anything further on the information bulletin? Okay. Well, that means that just leaves 8.1 where there's a couple of questions on the confidential attachments. So we will just have to end the live stream for a short time. There won't be any further business to discuss after that, but I will be back to close the meeting. This being the last item for questions and answers this evening. So we will